that music is just there, and by writing it down, we are just taking what's in the air, and by being performers, we are simply freeing it off the page again and putting it back into the air.
Welcome to The Choir Baton, a podcast designed to engage with people and stories, ideas, and inspirations stemming from choir. No other art form, no sport, no hobby, no business requires a group of people to execute a communal goal with just their voices. Join me, your host, Beth Philemon, as I interview guests who are singers, teacher conductors, instrumentalists, and community members. Together, we'll ask questions, seek understanding, and share insight from our experiences in life and in choir. Hey y'all, it's your host Beth Philemon, and I am so excited for you to listen to today's episode of the Choir Baton podcast. Today's episode is an interview with Ben Parry, and if that name is unfamiliar to you, I guarantee his work is not. You have probably heard many of the recordings that Ben has been a part of over the past years, but probably even just within this year alone. I discovered Ben and his work on a name basis when my dear friend Kate Foyles posted something on Instagram about the new Coldplay album, and I was listening to the track that she played, which featured a choir, and I was captivated by so much of it. You've probably, if you follow me on Instagram or Choir Baton on Instagram, you've probably seen me posting about it at some point. I did my research, made some contacts, and several months after that, here I am sitting down with Ben, the conductor of the London Voices, which is the choir that did the recording on that album. What I did not know was that the London Voices recorded not only that track, but so many other tracks for other recording artists, movies, video games, and more. In fact, while you're listening to this, you could even hop over to a good Google search and find the abundance of things that they have been a part of. What fascinated me on top of the work that Ben does with the London Voices is that Ben really is an example of one of these choral conductors that is a part of not just one choir, but many others. And his are incredibly varied, from the work that he does with his children's choir and children's and youth choir to the work that he does with King's College and the London Voices. And that really resonated with me because I truly love that as a conductor, teacher, musician, singer, all of the things, that I can exist in so many different types of music. I can be very multifaceted in what I do, both as a musician, but as a person as well. And I think that is so important for us to really lean into during this time where we are generally not making music with others like we traditionally do as choir singers. And it's an important thing for us to remember we are multifaceted, and just because we can't currently make music like we're used to doesn't mean we have to stop making music. Simultaneously, the type of choral music that led me to Ben was that of essentially studio singing, of a virtual choir of sorts, because of how they recorded the track, which you'll hear Ben explain in this interview. And again, a further testament to the fact that virtual choirs, digital music making, and recording can still be incredibly powerful to so many people, and ultimately reaching people that we might not be able to reach if we were just having a live performance. Ben is this champion, additionally, of not only multifaceted approaches to music, but the inclusivity that choral music can be for so many others. And you'll hear him talk about how he is championing women conductors, particularly at King's College, and how he is really consciously thinking about how he, as a leader, can engage diverse learners with diverse backgrounds and understanding of music making into the choir, so that the audition process even is not limiting or excluding other singers that perhaps haven't grown up with the same musical experience as others. There's so many amazing things for you to reach from this episode, and I'm so excited for you to lean in and hear what Ben has to share with us. I also want to remind you that if you are a member of the teaching membership, this month's mini class is on communication, and in particular digital communication to your choirs, to really help you lean into understanding some tools and resources and strategies so that you can reach your choir through as many different digital mediums as possible, but also streamlining that approach. I realize that it's also not possible for everyone to reach every single person in their choir, and we all have different digital needs and capabilities. But I did want to offer some solutions if you were looking for that. And you can find that in the teaching membership mini class that's for the month of May. And in the month of June, because we don't necessarily know what this next season of choral singing is going to hold for us, I'm going to feature a mini class that's going to lean into intention setting and identity centering as to who we are and why we make the music that we do, and strategizing how we can have helpful mindsets as we approach this uncertainty. I'm also excited to tell you that we are going to be launching a course this summer for singers. No longer is Choir Baton going to offer educational resources solely for teachers beyond this podcast and social media platforms. We are going to be featuring a course for singers to be able to learn and understand how they can show up in a choral music setting, be it rehearsal, performance, or even a virtual choir performance as well, depending on their range of experience, to really lean into our mantra at Choir Baton, which is more people singing. Thank you so much for being a listener and supporter of the Choir Baton podcast. Thank you to Ben for volunteering to be featured on this episode, and I so hope you enjoy the time that he has taken to share with us an insight into his life experience and music making. Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Choir Baton podcast. I am so honored to introduce today's guest to you, Mr. Ben Parry. Welcome, Ben.
Thank you very much.
If you have not yet heard of Mr. Parry, I guarantee you actually probably have heard of him and did not realize it, because he is the man behind many different groups, both in a classical and a non-classical choral setting. He is a director of the National Youth Choir of Great Britain, in addition to being a co-director of the London Voices, and his credits are incredibly long. In addition to his directing and conducting, he's also an arranger and singer. And I'm just really honored to have you as a guest today, Ben.
Oh, thank you so much.
Absolutely. So you are all the way in the UK, and why don't you go ahead and start by telling the Choir Baton community a little bit about what your role right now is?
So, like you said, I wear lots of hats in my career. I guess the most regular and important job I do at the moment is as artistic director of the National Youth Choirs of Great Britain, which is a large community of choirs. There are actually 5 choirs, and we cater for 800 or 900 young people from the ages of 9 through to 24. And it's something I've been doing for the last 7 years. This is my 8th year running that. And that's been an amazing insight into working with young people, which I've done really throughout the whole of my career, actually. And that's, if you like, my kind of real job, in inverted commas. But then I do a whole host of other things. You mentioned London Voices. So I'm co-director of London Voices. And as you were saying to your listeners, you probably haven't heard of London Voices, but you will have heard them, because we're essentially a large pool of professional singers who work in and around London, mainly in recording, whether that be for film soundtracks or gaming, or a whole host of artists as well, pop artists and classical artists. So our back catalogue is really quite impressive, and we work in the major studios in London. Yeah, there's a lot of good names in there, I must say. Also, I have a job at King's College, Cambridge, which is most well known, I'm sure a lot of your listeners know, for the carol service that happens on Christmas Eve. So my very grand title is their Assistant Director of Music, although actually my main role is to direct a mixed choir. So we have a choir of women and men, so women undergraduates, who get to sing in the chapel as well. So the famous choir, of course, is with the boy choristers. But in 1997, my boss, Stephen Clearbury, who very sadly died at the end of last year, he'd been in the job 37 years, set up a choir with women in the college as well, which is brilliant, particularly in this day and age, that there's a bit more equality there. So I run that as well. But like you said, I also arrange and I compose and I write library music, production music, and classical choral music when I can. So yeah, life is always busy, never dull.
Right. When sleeping is just not a word in your vocabulary.
Not an option. Well,
Yes.
I have three grown-up children. So sleeping wasn't really an option for the last 20 years either. So, yeah, it's great. And like a lot of musicians and creative people, I thrive on all those different things. I thrive on the fact that my job and my career is so eclectic. So I love the fact that on one day I could be doing a choral evensong in King's College Chapel, and the next day I'd be writing some production music that's going to be played on a jingle somewhere, and then the next day I'm working with the youth choir, and so on and so forth. So that kind of big mix of different disciplines and attitudes and approaches to my music is something that I really enjoy.
I just am so inspired by that as well. And we have spoken with several guests like that, but none to the extent with which you embody that so well. I have a lot of different questions, but kind of even just looking at someone hearing this and being inspired like I am about how you quote unquote do it all. What are strategies that you have learned to develop that enable you to operate at such a high level, but yet also be involved in so many other things?
That's a very perceptive question, and I've asked myself that question over many years, and also asked other musicians as well. And I was going to say to you, you know, some people could look on my career as saying, you know, I'm a jack of all trades. I don't know whether you know that expression,
Yes,
jack of all trades, master of none. And perhaps the word master is wrong, but actually one of the tricks here is doing the best that one possibly can in the particular sphere that one is working in. You know, a lot of creative and artistic types say, you know, their career and well, I don't know how to gauge success, but whatever success may be, or fulfillment, should we say, is all little bits of luck, talent, obviously, being in the right place at the right time, knowing the right people, being a nice person, and so on and so forth, and being very good at one's job. There are various spheres, and my wife, who's a professional violinist, often criticizes me, in fact, from my singing, is that I never practice. Possibly as a singer, I have been lazy, but actually as a musician, as an overall all-round musician, I couldn't really call myself lazy, because I'm very proactive. I feel a need to be creative a lot of the time. So the trick is, I think, in answering your question, is the strategy is that throwing oneself into a project with enthusiasm and application, and trying to do the best job that one possibly can without being the center of it, without being egotistical about it, which I think is also another fault in a lot of musicians, is that they make their work about them rather than it being about something else. And I've learned that particularly through working with young people, because I see and I work with young people a lot, and I say to them a lot of the time, you know, I'm still learning. This is a constant learning process, and for as long as I am a practicing musician, I will continue to learn. I should never be nonchalant or cocky and just sit back and say, well, I know everything now. You know, striving for perfection as well. But I think launching oneself into projects with a sense of enthusiasm and application, I think, is really important.
Absolutely. Are there times when you do struggle to feel inspired, or that enthusiasm wanes, or what are ways in which you have fought off letting the opinions of others dictate how you might approach something with enthusiasm?
That's another brilliant question. You're really putting me on the spot here. But it's great. No, you're absolutely right. I am inherently, I think, also people tell me, and I understand it, a very self-confident person. So I don't struggle per se with the work that I do or the way that I deport myself if I'm doing a job, because I have a confidence. That's not being overconfident or being narcissistic or anything. I just feel that I place myself in a situation. I go, right, okay, I know what I can do here. There have been various times in my life where I struggled with work. I'm not sure. As I get older, it gets more difficult. Not so much because there are lots of people, younger than me who were as good or better than me. It's not that, because I think that experience in any walk of life, in any career that one does, experience counts for so much, and it's sometimes we forget that. So that if we're working on something, and you go, actually, I've done this before. I've done this hundreds of times. It's like a film. If we're doing a film soundtrack, and you've got a very assertive composer or director or music producer who says, "But I don't want it like that," and I know that it's going to sound better if we do it in that way. And it's finding a patience and an empathy with the people that you're working with, to go, everybody has their own set of attitudes and beliefs, and I have my own as well, and therefore sometimes there's going to be a conflict. But I don't know whether you know about transactional analysis, where as grown-ups we should talk to each other as grown-ups, not as parents or as children. Right. And so that all comes into play when I'm doing my work, and I've learnt over the years to accept the fact that sometimes, if a music producer wants it done a certain way and I don't agree, just do it their way, and if it falls down flat, then that's not my fault.
Right.
It's a difficult one to learn, but I think, again, in answer to your question, I think that probably comes with experience.
Yeah, I think patience is something that is too often forgotten and not acknowledged in situations, even like that one as well.
I would be quite surprised if anybody that you spoke to who had sung with me as a choir director would say that I would get angry. I don't get angry, and I don't get negative when I'm working with choirs. I am firm. I mean, if something's not right, I'll say, but I never get angry, because I've seen, again, it comes from experience. As a singer, I've seen time and time again choral conductors standing up in front of us and just giving off completely the wrong kind of message, and the singer's just closing down and it not working. So I always like to say to my singers, I'm merely here as a facilitator. I'm not a dictator. I'm an interpreter of the music that I'm looking at, and I'm suggesting this is the way that I want it to go, and I know exactly what I'm doing. But I want you as a choir or you as a singer to own the music and own the performance, and I will merely facilitate that and guide that. And I think that's a really important thing, that particularly all young conductors who are up and coming and want to work at whatever level they're going to, whether it be a community choir or a high school choir, college choir, professional choir, or so on. I think that's a really important lesson to learn, that it's the singers who own the music, not necessarily the conductor.
Well, and that is something, though, that is very often overlooked or dismissed. And I have many times been in a choir with a dictator-esque type of conductor, and at times have been, I'm sure, perceived as that type of conductor as well, particularly as a young conductor. And as I struggle, especially my first couple of years of teaching, to figure out who I was and how to operate. But I'm curious, I've seen a change in singers to where they are craving that relationship building and that trust, and they don't respond to, especially here in the US, what was that dictatorship type style conducting. Have you seen that as well? Or it also maybe might not just be as prevalent overseas?
Yeah, no, I have seen that over the years. I think the landscape is changing now, partly because of this redress in the gender balance. And I think, that's a very important subject that it is close to my heart, you know. And as a white male, middle-aged, with a Cambridge degree, with an Oxbridge degree from the UK, you know, many people would say I'm not ideally placed to champion it, but I totally am.
I think absolutely.
Not
you, then who? Almost.
Well, I mean, exactly. And I think you know, one of the things that's very incumbent upon me is the whole, you know, just living through the Me Too campaign and seeing, you know, the ship begin to turn slowly in the direction that it should be. I think it's very important for people in my position, you know, given the age that I am and the experience that I've had, is for me to educate younger conductors, male and female, that, you know, this is how it should be. You know, and that there is a greater equality of everything that we do, you know, whether it be gender or ethnic background or socioeconomic or geographical, all those things. And these are things that have been laid bare before us with the National Youth Choir in particular. And I think that's a very positive thing. So yes, I have seen that over the years, and actually calling people out and saying, no, that's not the sort of language you use in front of a choir. That's not, you know, that's not how you treat a conductor, or how a conductor should treat their singers, and so on. So, you know, I am an apostle for that sort of thing. I think that's very important, and particularly for younger people to learn that as well. I think it is changing, but it comes, you know, if you look back at the British scene, you know, we have 800-900 years of singing in cathedrals that has been the male bastion. You know, I mentioned King's College earlier. You know, when that was set up in the 1400s, you know, the statute said, you know, that it'll be for the benefit of 12 boys and 12 men. Well, that's how it was 600 years ago, but we're not living 600 years ago anymore. So there needs to be a balance. Having said that, I think it's very important that there is still a balance in the other direction, and, you know, that we don't lose sight of the fact that young boys should continue to sing, because, you know, where are our tenors and basses going to be in 10, 20 years time if we say, no, it's just for girls, it should be for boys as well. Right. And that's very much the language we use at National Youth Choir in particular.
I love that. That's was actually going to be my next question then, as you shared that you were a part of that time when women were brought in, and now there's a mixed choir, and now being the conductor of the mixed choir there, if you would share a little bit about that experience and what you've learned and continue to experience through it.
Yeah, I mean, it was very interesting actually, Beth, because about 6 years ago, a conductor got in touch with me about some other work that I was doing that I didn't run it, but she wrote to me and said, you know, there were 4 directors and they were all male. And I said, well, I can't comment on that particular scheme of work, but what I can say is that at National Youth Choir, we try and have more of a balance. And then we met and we got to know each other, and we had some really interesting chats. And that really set me on the path of beginning to understand where this was all heading. This was before, you know, the last 2 or 3 years with the Me Too campaign. And that, I suppose that kind of preempted what was going to happen. I was quite lucky in the sense that I had that conversation with this particular conductor, who she was not that she was zealous about it or anything, but she just felt from her position that it wasn't, that there was an inequilibrium there, and I think she was right. And so that got me thinking. But it was only actually in the last 2 years that it really made me understand this is so important, and particularly somewhere like King's College. We've made quite a big deal of the fact that we have a mixed choir there. The new director of music, Dan Hyde, is massively supportive of us, even though, you know, he's got a big job to fulfill with the chapel choir that's so famous and so out there. King's Voices is, you know, it's so much further down the scale, if you like. But, you know, a lot of people turn up on a Monday to come and hear Evensong in King's College Chapel, and the point is that the chapel choir doesn't sing on a Monday, so King's Voices does, and whatever replaces the chapel choir, because the vast majority of the congregation will be expecting to hear some amazing choral music in King's. So it has to be good. And I've made that my mission. I've been doing that job 7 years now, is that whatever replaces King's College Choir is, it's different. It's not that it has to be as good or better or not quite as good. It's just a different thing. And that's been very revealing to me as well.
Yeah. How have you approached then that balance, right, of it being different and it being okay, both in, just the repertoire that you might be picking or execution, or even hearing people's responses when they come expecting to hear the boys choir and they don't?
Yeah, well, you've said it there with the repertoire. It's being clever with repertoire planning. So, we're not going to do crazy difficult stuff, and we're not going to do banal stuff or simplistic. You do good music because it's good, but also because it's singable. And I've talked to a lot of composers, and again, we are very strong on programming music by women composers, because I think that's very important as well. But choosing music that is well written and is easy to sing, not easy to sing, but easy to rehearse, because we only rehearse once a week for an hour. So there's skill in doing that as well, and that sends out quite a strong message again to fledgling conductors who are thinking of doing this sort of thing, that that is possible to do, but you've got to think sort of a bit outside the box, if you like.
Right. I love that you talk about good music not always just being the hardest music, because that is an easy trap that especially young conductors, I feel like, fall into.
Yes, I think that's right. They want to impress, don't they? And I see that a lot with auditions that I do. So we audition the National Youth Choir annually, so they have to do an audition to get back in, or there are younger people joining the training and the junior choirs further down the line. But we always say to them, look, don't sing something flashy just because you think you're going to impress us. Sing something that you love to sing. Right. It can be a simple song, but it can be a tricky song if you're really good at singing it and you love singing it. But sing something that means something to you rather than it meaning something to us, because you don't know what we think. You just need to really feel the music, and I think that's a good lesson to learn as a young conductor. That music programming is paramount.
I love that statement, and it's so important as a singer and as a conductor as well. But let's transition then a little into the youth choir then. And would you mind sharing with listeners a little bit about how that's set up, first and foremost, for those that aren't familiar with the model?
Sure, absolutely. So our model for the National Youth Choirs of Great Britain, it's been going 37 years now. I've been running it for the last 8 years. It went through a slightly volatile time at the moment I joined, but we have done a root and branch review over the years. We've got it on a professional footing, so there's a proper staffing structure. There's an amazing board of trustees now. It has charitable status. And the thing has grown over the years. It's a huge organization. But the main point of it is, and I'll explain this in a little bit more detail in a minute, but is to offer the best possible experience to young talented singers in our country through life-changing performances and education and musical experience. Now, we've done a lot of soul searching over the years, and a lot of groups, and particularly in the arts and particularly in music and particularly in singing, actually, a lot of groups are very good at saying who they are and what they do. Very few groups are very good at saying why they're doing it and how they do it. And I think that is something that's been something that we've learnt very clearly over the last few years, is this idea of aims and outcomes. So any project that we do now, we sit down with the team and we say, okay, well, I've got this great idea to do this concert in a field in the middle of nowhere with 8,000 young people singing. And you go, well, okay, what are the aims and outcomes? Who's going to benefit from it? What do you want to achieve with it? What's going to be the outcome? Is it going to be a benefit to young people? Is it going to be a benefit to the wider choral community and further the wider general public? and we write all these things down, and sometimes your outcomes will then change your initial aims,
Right.
which is a really interesting exercise. And then when we actually put the thing together and we do it, we then evaluate the whole project. So we have what we call an event report. So we write everything down, good and bad, and say that worked really well, that wasn't so good. So if we're going to do this again, this is what we're going to need to change. And this has been a transformational thing as far as the organization is concerned. We want to ensure that every young person who comes through the system with the National Youth Choirs, and they'll only get in if they have a passion. Well, the younger ones also have a potential, but they have to have a talent and a skill that they can learn as they go through the choirs, but they have to have that passion and potential at the beginning, that they come out the other end, either because they want to go into a career as a singer, or they will be tomorrow's audiences as well, because a lot of them will become, doctors and professionals and lawyers and architects and so
financially supporting the industry.
Absolutely. And they will be, those who make money will come calling to them later down the line and say, can you come and support us? But it's so important that those are the people who are going to support us and be advocates of what we do. Right. And I think back in the past, it was a great choir, but it was very sort of introverted, and it wasn't outward facing and saying, look, this is available to anybody from any background, come what may. If you have the passion and potential to be in this choir, you could do it. So we're also a signpost organization. So we say, look, kid comes from, a deprived background and hasn't had the experience that we are looking for. We say, well, look, go for a year to your local choir in your region, work with them, look at our videos online about musicianship and learning to read music and pitching and tonal centering and all those sorts of things, then come back to us in a year and see how you get on. And a lot of the time it works. But, it's very important here in Great Britain, the issues that I've mentioned earlier of diversity, access. How do you get a young person from a difficult background to be able to audition? Well, we've had a massive meeting the other day about our recruitment processes and saying, I don't want to talk about how we've done it in the past because it's not fit for purpose. There's no point in raking over old ground. Let's find a way that we can encourage any kid from any background to come and sing with us. So for example, the younger kids, we're designing an audition process where they don't have to prepare a song. They come in groups and they sing with us, and they learn a song, call and response, in their audition with other kids, and we see how they interact with the other kids around them. So it's really exciting that the organization has been on such a journey and such a sea change in which relatively short space of time in its history, but that's where it's kind of set now, and I think that gives out a very positive message.
Well, two things that I just have to say, that acknowledgement of the gap that you all are doing in accessibility is so inspiring, and ultimately where my heart is as well. But two things that I think uniquely equip you to be this person to help bridge this gap is what I'm hearing is you really have bolstered the youth choir into, this is an actual business. And yes, we love singing. Yes, we believe in the power of choral music, but we have to be strategic in our approach, hence focusing on things like aims and outcomes.
Yeah, well, there's a practicality there, isn't there, as well? We all can dream and think of our wonderful creative output, but actually, like you say, there is a practicality there as well, and we've got to be sensible. And not least, of course, the devil is in the finance. This thing costs a lot of money, and money is short. And particularly in the arts, I don't know what it's like for you guys over there, but in Britain, we're at the bottom of the pile. And yet we know, because we've now done the research, that the effects of music, and particularly singing, on well-being and mental health are so wide-ranging and far-reaching that it's incumbent upon us, those of us who have the drive to be able to affect this, keep on battling. And it does feel like a battle sometimes, particularly in education. I mean, I think my work on a professional level with London Voices is different, because we're basically sort of providing a service, if you like.
Sure.
But what's so fascinating for me is that at one end I've got that, and at the other end I've got these youngsters, you know, and you can just see the desire on their faces and hear it in their voices. And they're, you know, a lot of those are going to be the singers of tomorrow, who I'm going to use as professionals in London Voices, doing the, you know, the earning money as a career singer. Right. So that's all so important, and that one tries to accentuate the positive as much as possible.
Yeah.
But you know, benefaction, if you think back to Italy in the 15th, 14th and 15th centuries, you know, all arts was subsidized by benefactors, rich people who lived in palazzi. Right. There's a sort of element of going back to that now, because governments don't have much fun. You know, there's not much money from state funding. There's not much money from corporate sponsorship, although it has got a little better. But, you know, benefaction, if my ship ever came in, you know, I know where I'd be spending my money, and it would be on the education of young musicians.
Right. Absolutely. I love so much of that recognition of this is the reality, and this is how we have to be practical in the approach to it. And then my second thing that I can't help but wonder if has really informed this transformation that you're doing for the youth chorus is this realization that we don't have to do things like we've always done it. We don't have to audition students within a song. And it seems like you would be perfectly equipped to understand this world of popular music that ultimately, you know, you're doing recording sessions for, right? Yep. And how then we can take how kids are interacting with music every single day, probably even more than they have in years past, thanks to headphones and all the streaming devices and such, and then using that to inform that we can still use that to draw them into choral music. Would you say that has kind of influenced that as well?
Oh, undoubtedly, yeah. And I mean, I was saying earlier, you know, about being a jack of all trades. I mean, I've grown up being at an advantage, having worked in the various areas of music that I have. I mean, I grew up in a very musical family. My dad was a music teacher and a church organist. My mum was an amateur singer. She sang with Benjamin Britten in the Aldeburgh Festival, you know, those sorts of things. So I was very much immersed in music from a very, very young age, as early as I can remember. And there are sort of, I've bored a lot of people with these sort of pivotal moments in my childhood that were these moments where I went, oh, that's what I want to do. That's what makes me tick as a human being. But I was lucky because I went to university and I got into, you know, light music and cabaret. And then when I graduated, I got into the Swingle Singers and I did 5 years with them. And I did a West End show, West End being your Broadway, for a year. And then I went up to Scotland and lived there for 8 years and set up my own group. And that group was really interesting because that was essentially a classical vocal consort called Dunedin Consort that's based in Edinburgh. But we did, because of my eclectic background, we were doing you know, plain chant of Hildegard from Bingen all the way through to Stockhausen Stimmung, you know, and we did everything in between as well. And I love that. And then more recently, as you just mentioned, you know, doing recordings with pop artists, you know, I understand their language. I'm not a pop singer, obviously, but I understand their modus operandi and the way they work in the studios, and very lucky to have worked with, you know, some really top people just to see how that all works. And so coming to something like the National Youth Choir, instilling that sense of obviously passion and enthusiasm, but also discipline in one's music making is what we were saying earlier, wasn't it? About, you know, what's the most important thing about approaching one's music, but it is that sense of enthusiasm, but also real art and striving for perfection. You're never going to reach perfection, so there's no point in battling and thinking has to be the best performance, because you'll never get there. But that kind of crossover thing I've always loved, and I suppose rather in the way that, you know, sometimes I can learn a lot from a young choir. They do something amazing and you kind of think, but you're an amateur youth choir, and actually the way you sung that is is so perfect. And then with a professional choir, with them not mucking around but being enthusiastic and having fun with it, and you go, but that's how the youth choir normally behaves. And so there's a lovely kind of to and fro thing there. I think it's the same with the musical stars as well. You know, each informs the other, and I think it goes backwards and forwards, and so I really enjoy that.
I love that, and I love that kind of dichotomy which you bounce back and forth between. I'm really curious, would you be willing to share with our listeners about studio choral music? You know, at times it's something we don't even realize at times that we're listening to, I think, to be quite honest, right?
Yeah.
And it's something that we just don't talk about a lot. Would you be willing to share with us your experience on that?
Sure. When I joined up with London Voices, it was about 15, 16 years ago. So my co-director is Terry Edwards, who is now 81, and he's still working. And he has been at the forefront of singing in London for 50 years or so. He was a singer himself. He managed the Swingle Singers back in the 70s. He was director at the Opera House, Covent Garden Opera House Chorus for 12 years. And he set up London Voices about 30, 40 years ago. And they were sort of one of the go-to choruses for concerts and recordings with the London Sinfonietta and various other orchestras. And as Terry got older, the work kind of dropped off a bit, and there were other groups sort of moving up behind and doing that sort of work. So he brought me in 15 years ago and asked me whether I wanted to run it with him, and I went, yeah, I'd like to do that. And at the time, actually, they were probably only doing 1 or 2 film soundtracks a year, very occasional studio recording with another artist. And through a lot of work on both our parts, but particularly me introducing a lot of a new sort of fresh blood of singers into the group, which was really needed at the time. And doing some top work, in the studios, we're now positioned as sort of one of the go-to choirs for that. So we're doing upwards of 20, 25 film soundtracks a year. We work for sort of 5 to 10 games companies who have a lot of money to throw at their music now. And so the majority of our work is based in one of the 2 big studios in London. Obviously, there's the famous Abbey Road studio where the Beatles recorded. There's also Air Studios, which George Martin, who was the Beatles producer, set up. It's a fantastic studio. It's a disused church up in North London, and it's got one of the best acoustics for a studio in the world. And I love the studio work simply because you've got it's from my point of view, as opposed to the singers, I am multitasking. It's not just conducting and interpreting music. It's rescoring. It's deciding the balance on the hoof, because we don't rehearse. So we go into the studio and the music is there and they sight read it. They've never seen it before. And the red light goes on and they've got to be that good. And what I love is that I'm a sort of multitasking musician as I do it, yet having to deal with a choir of 40, 50, 60 singers as well, and saying, right, we're going to go from here. You're going to hear 8 clicks. Here's your starting note, and I'll have a keyboard in front of me and I'll play their cues so they know what to expect. It's so exciting, quite apart from the fact, of course, that I have the screen in front of me, so I'm seeing bits of the film and I'm going, yeah, I'm working on that film. It's really exciting, but it's the discipline that one engenders. And just being, I was saying earlier about being efficient, one has to be massively efficient in that job. But I for some reason, I kind of thrive on that. I love it. And in fact, it's probably some of the most enjoyable work that I do. So that's really fun. Yeah, we've done some really good film soundtracks over the years.
I mean, Harry Potter, Star Wars,
Yeah.
the list could just go on and on.
Yeah.
In fact, I have, I had it pulled up and then I jumped away from it to look at something else, which I'll bring up in a second.
Well, Yeah, we've done Disney. We did Beauty and the Beast, and we did Aladdin last year. It's very, very exciting. Bond movies as well. It's great. I mean, the interesting thing is, of course, that then one listens back, one goes to see the film, and one listen. I always listen to the music, of course, because I can't help myself.
Right.
But sometimes the choir is almost obliterated out because you've got all the talking and the sound effects and the orchestra. Actually, I did go to one a couple of years ago. It was Jurassic World. We sang on the Jurassic World film, and the choir was so loud, and it was so exciting. The other one was the last Bond film called Spectre, where James Bond is driving around. He's in a car chase going through Rome, and he goes past St. Peter's Cathedral. And as the cathedral comes up, there's this huge choir queue that comes in, and it was so loud on the film soundtrack. And I almost sort of stood up and went, yeah, I can hear them. And we always share a joke, my family and I, because we wait for the credits to roll at the end. Because, I get my name.
Of course, yeah.
But it's right at the very end. The musicians come last on the film credits. Of course, everybody has left the studio. The stewards are there waiting to clear up all the popcorn, and we're just there sat in the back row waiting for the credit. But yeah, it's really fun work, and it's I tell you the other thing, one other thing about it is that it can be, if one takes it in the wrong way, it can be very boring for the singers, because if you think of some of these film soundtracks where it's just a kind of mood thing and it's just a held chord. There's one film that we did called Interstellar about 3 or 4 years ago. It was a score by Hans Zimmer, and basically it was a C major chord throughout the whole film. It was an amazing film, and the soundtrack was brilliant, but literally we had to hold chords of C major on for measures and measures and measures and pages and pages. And my job there is to make the singers engage and be enthusiastic and say, so you hold this chord on for a minute or two. And then I bring them off and I go, great, okay, that's exactly the sound we want. Okay, can we do that again and make sure that we're really keeping that sound all the time? Okay, let's do it one more time, rather than going, oh, can we do another take? So that's also, it's a sort of facilitation role as well, my job there. But it's great fun. It's great fun.
Yeah, that enthusiasm that you do. So it's right. I mean, from The King, Maleficent, Dora and the Lost City of Gold, Aladdin, Tolkien, Avengers, PlayStation, Mission Impossible. I mean, I'm only to like 2015 or 16, and I'm only picking out ones that majorly I am aware of. There's a whole long page, and I'll post it on the show notes so you can see.
Yeah.
You also then do work with pop artists as well.
Yeah.
Like the
How's
latest Coldplay album.
Isn't that a beautiful track?
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. Yeah. We were really lucky to pick that one up. I mean, it just so happens that John Metcalf, who is he's an arranger and a producer with Coldplay, they had this song, When I Need a Friend, and he had written it for a choir backing. I mean, you can Google it. You can look on YouTube, and Chris Martin's playing it on piano and just singing this very, very simple tune. But for the album, he did a choral arrangement, and we'd worked with John before. It's like I was saying earlier about being in the right place and knowing the right people. He came to us, and so we did a session on that.
Wow.
And
I'm actually curious about the scoring of that. Did that have some unique scoring with it as well?
In what way?
I mean, the bass it's just, and then it's like slow, the build of the progression of the sopranos and altos coming in, just a midway for it. I mean, it is just so perfectly controlled is not the right word, but it is incredibly controlled.
Yeah. I mean, that I was saying a little while ago about my job as a conductor. It's not just a conductor. So John had done the arrangement, and it's great arrangement, but I'm also a writer and arranger. So I, in as diplomatic a way as possible, I say, actually, John, it would sound great if you have the tenors singing that low alto part rather than the low altos, and let's move the baritones up to sing the tenor part. And then, and he's great because he'll go, well, let's just hear that. you know, and if he hadn't have liked it, he would have said, let's just stick with what's on the paper. But actually, you know, a lot of the time I suggest something. I'm only suggesting it because I'm not because I want to sort of show off, but just because I know that it's going to sound better. And so there were a couple of moments in that, and that, you know, now and again I'll say, let's just move those, let's just rescore that. So sopranos, you take that note, and so on, and it kind of clears the way for a much better balance and vocal texture across the choir. It's very easy just to sort of sit with the notes and think, you will just sing this and it'll be fine. But actually, the microphones pick up so much more than you would hear orally in a live performance. So we worked, you know, we had a 3-hour session for that. What is it? 2 minutes of music at the most. But we spent the full 3 hours really working very hard. We do a thing called stemming, where you take each separate vocal line. So we had the first sopranos just do theirs, and then the second sopranos, and we went all the way down. And then there's more ability for the mixer, the guy who's working on post-production. They're able to have a bit more separation and be able to push a certain part if they need to.
Right.
But that's all part of the process, is working in the studio with, you know, the wonderful Pro Tools software that we use. I've got it here actually up on my computer here, because I'm working on a session at the moment for some production music. But learning to do having all those opportunities to learn, as I say, you know, I'm still learning. In fact, after I do this session with you, I'm actually going to go on a little webinar about some computer software for recording, because I'm learning all the time.
Right. But it's changing and evolving too. Like just as soon as you learn it, it's changed too, which is you know, exciting.
We did a really fun thing with Sting actually a few years ago. There's an amazing exhibition in Rome about the history of the Sistine Chapel, and it's an interactive kind of immersive thing in a theatre. And Sting wrote a Dies Irae version, and again he wanted. You remember he did an album called Songs from the Labyrinth some years ago. It was the music of John Dowland, who's a 15th century composer in Britain, English songwriter, and he did this thing. So he loves that kind of very early music, non-vibrato type singing. And he wrote this beautiful Dies Irae. And again, it was an American producer called Rob Mathis, who I'd worked with before. So he came to me and we did a session on that. That's a beautiful piece, actually. You can get that on Spotify. Yeah. But Sting was great. And it's just amazing standing in the studio. I mean, I'm sort of doing a bit of a clang here by name dropping, but you know, you stand in a studio with Sting and you go, so tell me about your career and tell me about, you know, why you've chosen a choir here. And it's just like gold dust, honestly, you know, just getting those little things. It's like when those young Hollywood stars, you know, they do a film with one of their idols, like Meryl Streep and Anne Hathaway, and Anne Hathaway says to Meryl Streep, "You're my idol, you know, I can't believe that I'm working with you." That it's a little bit like that for me. It's gold dust, honestly. It's great.
Absolutely. But I just love hearing stories like that, because music is music, right? It's all connected and it all informs one another. And it's such a testament to the power of choral music, and that, you know, yes, we are specialized and niche to a certain extent, but we also are a part of these broader experiences, so much so that at times people don't even realize it.
No, that's right. There's a kind of subliminal level, isn't there? I work with a brilliant wordsmith, a poet. We've written a lot of choral pieces together, and more recently I've met up with an old junior school friend of mine, actually, who's an artist, and we started talking last year about collaborating on a piece together. And in fact, what's happened, I've got a new CD coming out of my choral music in a month or so. In fact, I heard today from the record company that they've taken delivery of the CDs, so that's great. But a lot of the music on there is by this is settings of my friend's poetry, and I thought that the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get Jonathan, my friend, who's the artist, to design the cover, and the music is all about times of day and seasons, and we called it the title of the album is The Hours. Because it's hours in the day, but also hours in the night and the morning and everything. And there's sacred and secular music there. And I said to Jonathan, look, here's your first project, is to if you'd like to design the cover. And he said he listened to my music, and while he was listening to it, he painted, and he's come up with this exquisite oil painting. He's an abstract painter, but it's absolutely perfect. It's beautiful. But I got into some brilliant conversations about him. As I mentioned the word subliminal, he says he's very interested in the liminal, which is the bit between the artist and the painting. There's something going on there in that space. And I very much feel the same as that with music making as well. You know, you have your score, and a composer has written some music, and your mouth opens and you sing it and you interpret it. But what's happening between the score and yourself, there's some space there that something magical is happening and being created. And this was really drawn to my attention a few years ago. I'll just tell you a very quick story. I did this amazing piece by Stockhausen called Stimmung, which is basically based on one chord, and the singers do overtone singing on one chord for about an hour and a half. And a woman came up to me at the end of the concert, and she said, I love this concert. I haven't heard this piece before, but I've heard this music. And she said that she'd been on a trek in Norway and slept under the stars, and she heard this music in the air, the same thing that she'd heard in our concert. And I said to her, well, interestingly, my aunt is a Buddhist, and the Buddhist teaching is that music is all around us in the air. And as composers, we are simply just drawing it from the air and writing it down. It's already there. And of course, that's what Stockhausen believed. He believed he was a communicator of the stars and music to earth. And then the next day, I kid you not, I was listening to a radio program, and they were interviewing a sculptor. And they said, so how do you go about sculpting a head out of a block of stone? And the sculptor said, well, you know, this is a famous Michelangelo quote, but he said, well, it's easy because the head is already in the stone. I just have to take away the bits that aren't the head. It's already formed in there. And I thought that's such a beautiful kind of analogy, that music is just there. And by writing it down, we are just taking what's in the air. And by being performers, we are simply freeing it off the page again and putting it back into the air. Isn't that great? And I thought, that's amazing, because I have these arguments about how fast a piece of music should go. And you think of something like Bach or Handel, where the music basically has its own tempo. Some people do it too fast, some people do it too slow, but actually it has a natural tempo to it. And simply just by reading the music is freed and off the page, and back it goes out into the air again. Isn't that lovely?
I love that. I love that. I think that enables it to therefore communicate that with which we can't. Yeah.
It naturally communicates, and it has an ability to do that. And as musicians, we're just one step ahead because we are the communicators of it. And I think, you know, we are blessed. I've always said that, you know, my kids are all very musical as well. You know, we're just blessed to have that ability, and we're tuned into it. Right. You know, you can learn to a degree, you can learn to tune in. And I think that's very important, particularly with our work with younger people. But, you know, there is a natural thing there as well. And, you know, I bless my parents for, you know, instilling this love of music into me.
Yeah. I love that. That is such a powerful statement with which I think to close our time together, although I could talk to you and ask you many, many more questions. Perhaps we could have you on. Absolutely. Absolutely. Our listeners will definitely be tuned into your CD coming out within the next month. Will it be online available?
It will be, yes. It's all on the digital platform, so Spotify and Amazon, and you can download it. I mean, you can stream it on Amazon if you want, but I won't make any money.
So we need to make sure we stream it from.
Yeah, it's called The Hours, and it's my choral music, and it's on the Signum Classics label, which is a very, very reputable British label.
Excellent. And people can follow, I know you are very active, or the youth choir is very active on social media about doing certain things, as well as London Voices posts a lot on their website, and King's, I'm sure, is there too. People can find you, right?
Great. Yeah. I've got a little website that sits there. So if anybody want to look me up, I am there.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for the interview, especially, but then also just being an example of how we can coexist in music whether it's, traditional choral or non-traditional choir, and then also as a female within this industry as well. Thank you for being an ally and a champion for us as well.
That's my great pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks again for listening to another episode of the Choir Baton Podcast. I'm your host, Beth Philemon, and this episode has been produced by Maggie Hemmedinger. You can follow Choir Baton on Instagram. That's where we hang out the most, both myself and then the various takeovers that we host as well. Make sure you are signed up for our Choir Baton email that we send out once a week, filled with all kinds of information, inspiration, and insight in and about choir. And finally, know that Choir Baton exists to encourage you and to reignite a passion for choir within your heart and mind and soul, especially during this time. And if it has done that for you, we know it will do that for others. So please consider sharing this with a colleague, whether they are a fellow singer, teacher, conductor, composer, anyone within the field, or anyone that's just interested in choir and thinks needs to hear this message at this time. Please consider sharing this episode of the Choir Baton Podcast with them. Thank you so much for listening, and let's get more people singing.